halfway through the stop, you had to bang it on your leg in order to switch it directions.
There was an offer of a curry bowl after it was Saturday night, so I actually went along to it.
I feel like that'd have to go to Italian Parliament or whatever it is. And
At the moment, I have no plans to make myself a cup of tea later, but I probably will make myself a cup of tea later. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the F1 show here, sponsored by Audi. We are dissecting the events of the Austrian Grand Prix and looking forward to the British Grand Prix at Silverstone, where, by the way, Simon Lazenby has already travelled. I think he's already there pitching his tent at Woodlands, but happily we are joined by a couple of very special guests. Sky Sports News own our intrepid own Craig Slater and former technician at Red Bull Racing, Red Bull ambassador and author, Calum Nicholas. Hello, Calum. Hello, Craig.
How are we doing, Ted?
Oh, yeah.
Good. Very well.
People tuning in think I'm that Conor Moore guy that does the F1 impressions. I'm not.
Well, it's all right, Craig. It's all right, Craig. If I can wear this incredibly crumpled T-shirt, then you can be in your Red Bull kit. Just explain, Craig, why you're wearing it.
I'm wearing it partly in Calum's honour, I suppose. But we'll maybe get a chance to talk about it. I got to join in training with the pit crew last week at the factory, which was really good. But they gave me this.
I saw the feature. You earned the shirt, mate. So yeah, glad you earned it.
It was good, Craig. I'm glad, as you say, Calum, I'm glad you got to experience it because, I tried the wheel gunning with, I think it was Williams or maybe it was Alpine a while ago. And that was back when the wheel guns, Calum, were not as powerful as they are now. I think it was about 8 or 10 years ago that I did it. And whether it was, is it Paoli, this Italian company who do the wheel guns? They have now gone amazing with the torque. And back then it almost broke my wrists, but now it must be really difficult.
It's incredible when you think of how far we've come. Obviously, when I first started doing pit stops, wheel nuts weren't retained in the wheel. So there was a genuine risk of losing them down the pit lane. And wheel guns, halfway through the stop, you had to bang it on your leg in order to switch it directions, So I remember my first pit stop practice and waking up with this massive bruise on my thigh and thinking, oh my God. But yeah, we've come a long way.
It's not easier though, is it? I mean, it's the mentality, the confidence you've got to have, and,
for sure,
and riding the mistake, which is going to make the difference.
I think I always say about pit stops is the physical side of it. The motor skill. You can teach someone. It's 10,000 hours of experience, and it also, like at points, it feels almost autonomous. It is just muscle memory. But I think the mental side of the pit stops, the cognitive training, the sort of the calm, the focus. Those are the things that are really hard to train, and that's where you sort of the best stand out. Is when they're able to sort of do that, especially in those high pressure situations. It's easy doing pit stop practice when you're with your crew, your mates, and you're just going for it in practice. But when you're there in a race and there are sort of consequences and you're aware of them, that pressure does change.
A lot of time to think about it coming up, isn't it? That's right. I don't know if you're the same, Ted. I almost like to be surprised by something rather than have ages to prepare for something. Think about all the things that can go wrong.
Don't want to think about it too long.
Yeah. What really surprised me, actually, Craig, was how much kind of weight and mass you need to do the rear jack. I thought that was cantilevered to the point where anybody could essentially, have the leverage to pull it down. But actually, you need to weigh at least, I assume, 100 kilos or more to actually be able to lean down on it, no?
Yeah, I mean, I saw Ed giving you some tips on the rear jack, and I think one of the things is it's about momentum as well as weight. Like you're right, it does take a fair bit of weight to lift that back of the car, but as you sort of get more accurate with hitting that rear crash structure, that momentum helps you as well.
His leverage point, he takes one specific step and he's very specific about exactly where his center of weight is relative to the jack. And that's where I was continually getting exactly what Ted said. Yeah. I thought you could just push it anywhere, but you've got to be quite precise where you are. Yeah. And the leverage point is what it's
and also about. I remember when Ed took on that role. And, he had the same issues that anyone who's had taken on that role for the first time, even the ones that you had. And I've watched him train and get into it. And now, he's one of the best out there.
Yeah. Okay. Brilliant. Well, listen, we will talk more about that, more about Silverstone, Craig, which you're paying homage to with your Silverstone 75 years If you want to show the front of it, Craig, you'll see it's actually 75 years. There you go, Cap, and how Red Bull Racing, your team, Calum, did on the weekend. We start normally with biggest winner, biggest shocker, and moment of the weekend. So you got something, Calum?
I think the obvious shocker was for us. It was a weekend to forget. I think overall, we couldn't pull it together. The incident in the race, is something that's out of your hands anyway. It's one of those things. It's motor racing. It happens. People make mistakes. I think the obvious big winner last week was Lando. Not just winning the race was winning the race, but I think it was really important for him after Canada. And the whole weekend he just did a great job. All weekend, didn't put a foot wrong. He was, unfazed. Oscar's brilliant, and he put pressure on him for so much, such a long period of time. And I think, the win itself, bouncing back after Canada, and the confidence it will give him going into this weekend at Silverstone, which we know he loves anyway. He's obviously the big winner from Austria. For me, I tell you what, the moment of the weekend was actually not racing at all. The moment of the weekend for me was getting to see Bernie Collins talk to some of the incredible women on the grid about the work they do, celebrating International, Women in Engineering Day and things like that. So that for me was the moment of the weekend. I really enjoyed that. It's brilliant. I always enjoy getting to celebrate the amazing people who work behind the scenes in the paddock anyway. So I thought it was really important. The response to it's been fantastic. So yeah, that was my moment of the weekend.
Oh, great! I'm glad you like that, because it's something we thought about quite heavily and how to do that. So I'm glad you like that. Right, Craig, are you ready, or should I do mine?
Yeah. Moment of the weekend, I'm going to give it to Max Verstappen, picking up on the Antonelli incident. Pure class from him. Didn't lose his rag at all. Consoled Antonelli, sympathised with him. Mark of a champion and a gentleman, and we don't always focus on that side of him, but he's a very good human being. So well done him. Shocker of the weekend, I'm going to hold my hand up. Really bad for me. I was convinced myself in my own head that Alex Dunn was from Northern Ireland and said it on here, and upset one or two people. I know where Offaly is. I know he's from Offaly. That was a bad gaffe. Apologies to everyone there. That was the shocker of the weekend.
Okay.
Fine. And then winner, toss up between Liam Lawson and Gabriel Bortoleto for first points. I might just edge towards Liam Lawson because he was put through the ringer a bit earlier in the year. And that's a bit of Kiwi grit he's shown to come back and perform as well as he has.
That's a very good call. Actually, I hadn't thought of that. So I'll go Bortoleto if you didn't go Lawson, but I think Lawson is in with the shout with Lando as being the biggest winner. Biggest shocker for me has to be Williams. Actually, I mean, Calum, you thought Red Bull Racing had a bad day, but Williams was even worse. With Carlos Sainz not getting it together in qualifying. Alex Albon looked good, didn't he, off the start, but then had what we think is this kind of similar, but as yet unadmitted to issue that Williams won't to really tell us what it was, but they think it might be similar power unit as what happened in Canada. And then Carlos Sainz with the brake fire.
Yeah,
that was a shocker. And moment of the weekend is probably the recovery truck knocking into the.
I saw that.
That could be goes the biggest shocker as well. So there has to be some kind of. I thought because that's the second time that's happened after Baku. There's got to be some kind of precaution in place for these guys who are not, recovering the cars every weekend. I wonder how we could do that. What would be an elegant engineering way, Calum, of making sure that recovery guys don't take out these bridges?
I mean, you could
just remind them.
Make sure that when you set up the circuit that the trucks are not going to have an issue.
Oh, that's true.
Always have a thing as well. Like I've always thought that like the recovery crews and the marshals from Monaco should go and train other recovery crews because let's be honest, they're the best in the biz.
They are the best.
Monaco recovery crews really are, and in the hardest circumstances, they do this incredible job. And I think like they'd be great to go and train other crews around the world.
Yeah. No, that's a really good point, isn't it? 'Cause sometimes with recovery, it seems to happen very quickly in Monaco, and before you know it, if you've got a red flag, you've got a green flag suddenly.
Yeah, for sure.
And they're out again, or the safety car can come in, and that would be a good idea. Right, let's get on to what happened in the race, shall we? McLaren, Oscar and Lando had a phenomenal battle, at least in the first stint. Didn't really last in the second and third. But we have a question here from Andy. How important was Lando's managing of his battery charge in the first stint? And did it help him keep the lead when Oscar had DRS? Now, this is an interesting one because there's no sort of magic electricity, is there, Calum? I mean, where you deploy your battery in defence, you've got to charge it at some point.
Absolutely.
And was that clever of Lando as to where he did it?
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously you have to, you're trying to weigh it up in your mind, because at the same time as you, at least the guy you're racing has the same equipment as you. So you know how his car operates and what he can do and what he's capable of. So at least you have that knowledge that your equipment is sort of set up roughly in the same way. But then at the same time, at the ultimate unit, you know that he's got not only exactly the same tools as you, but he's also going to get DRS lap after lap after lap. So yes, Lando's choices in terms of where he chose to use his deployment throughout that whole stint where Oscar were behind him were crucial. And, like I said, it was part of him staying calm and collected and really showing what he was capable of last weekend.
The Will Joseph coaching was a feature as well, wasn't it?
Yeah. Look, I think, we've seen over so many years the different relationships drivers have with their engineers. We saw it for many years with Lewis and Bono, obviously GP and Max, and their relationship was always a talking point. And it's going to be the same thing. They will just find their own way that works for them. And honestly, it's one of those things that I feel like our opinion on it really doesn't matter. That's their working relationship. Whatever works for them is the best way. We can't see it from the outside. That's the reality of it. And I've said this to many people about Max and GP. You think you can understand from the radio messages you hear the relationship. You can't. I've seen it. It works. It's very special and particular for them. So yeah, it's great that they're managing to make it work, and everybody did a great job last week.
He kind of answered his own question about the battery, didn't he? In submitting, I mean, it was all about that. That's all he had to with the 3 DRS zones, the battery management key.
Yeah.
Was there anything to dig into looking ahead? That was Oscar quicker in the higher speed and Lando a little bit more expert in the longer medium speed? If we're looking for the tour to see where their relative strengths are, looking ahead, was there anything in that? I don't know.
Yeah, there could be. I mean, I would expect Oscar to be, very strong at Silverstone. But then Lando, with the extra kind of energy he gets from the crowd, should be there as well. It'll be a very good fight. I would imagine, Calum, it will be a better race weekend for Red Bull. I think it's a bit more suited than Austria, but we'll see. At least they'll hopefully make it past the first one. But
I think at least with Silverstone, the track is varied, right? So that there are bits where you can get the better bit out of your car and whatever. I think with Austria, this is what you got. It's very much point and shoot, and then a last sector that has like a couple of fast corners, and it's it's a bit restrictive. So hopefully next week can be a little bit better.
Question for Calum.
Yeah, sorry, go on, Craig.
I was going to say, the whole thing about the upgrade and or not an upgrade, but the design aid for Lando on the suspension and Oscar not taking it, and then how that play, when the two sides of the garage go in is that going to be a feature from here on? And were you interested about the way Oscar didn't take that particular modification and Lando did?
I mean, look, by all accounts, it was more just a preference for driver feel. No, I think if the engineering team and the vehicle performance groups, if they look at it and say, look, it's not a massive outright performance thing, but it will change the feel, then yeah, I think it's not it's not completely strange for a driver to just say, you know what, I'm happy with the feel I've got right now. I don't know if maybe he'll look at it after Austria and perhaps, maybe that might change his mind, or he might decide that Silverstone as a circuit might be one where he goes, you know what, I want to give this a try and go the same way as Lando might.
Do you put your hand up if you're Piastri and go, you've designed this nice thing for Lando, where's my nice little bit that's being designed for me? Or is Mark Webber saying that? You know what I mean? Every little bit edge. It felt like a special treatment for Lando from the outside. It was cast that way. Does Oscar get, or was that just because the car was better for Oscar in the first place? They were evening it up. It's tricky stuff.
It's hard, isn't it? It's hard to say without being in those walls. It's hard to say how that conversation went. But my understanding was that Oscar just generally preferred the other version. We'll just have to see, I guess, going forward and seeing what tracks that he might feel that there's a different direction to go in. Time will tell.
Did Andrea Stella say, Craig, did you hear him say that might be McLaren's last big upgrade of the year? which seems amazing. But I guess as everybody prepares for 26, then it might be.
I think everyone else will be hoping so.
It was, he said, not the absolute final one, but I think, there was a briefing, and there was an offer of a curry bowl after it was Saturday night, so I actually went along to it. Anyway, but yeah, that's what he said. He said that it was important that this upgrade delivered. He believed it had, and it was along the lines of, we will make some modifications, but this might be the last big step of the year. And he credited Lando's mental fortitude, saying, people have questioned whether he's got a mental weakness. We know he hasn't. He's kind of come back from a difficult spell, and once the car's to his liking, he can perform again. But yeah, so maybe McLaren think they've got enough of a margin now to fend off the rest.
Okay, well, that will be interesting to see how it goes at Silverstone, and how whether Lando's comeback or the bounce back, or Lando in form again, whatever you want to call it, lasts for the next few races, or whether championship leader Oscar Piastri manages to win another one before the summer break. Right, let's move on to Red Bull, because we've got you here, Calum. We want to hear your expertise on this. Max Verstappen, of course, as you said, victim of Kimi Antonelli at turn 3 on the first lap. What's it like in the garage when your main guy, who we don't know how the race was going to turn out, Calum, you can never know. A butterfly flaps its wings. Sure. If Max was behind the McLarens and they took each other out, it could have been different. Max could have won the race. What's it like when you see your main guy sort of go out on lap 1 like that?
I'll be honest, it's disappointing either car. Ultimately, for us especially, as a mechanic, that Constructors' Championship is your bonus, as well as the fact that that's what you're competing for. You're competing as a team. So to see either car have an incident is like that. I think when it's something like the incident we saw in Austria, it's just really frustrating. But at the same time, for me, and admittedly, it's a lot easier for me now to be just a fan of racing, right? That's when I started out in Formula One as a fan of racing, and this is a lot easier for me because it is, it's not my sweat going into it each weekend. But when it was, it's incredibly frustrating. Lap 1 incident like that, lap 2 incident like that, it's just super frustrating. But ultimately, it doesn't matter what car it is. It's for you, and you don't care about the work. Especially on a Sunday, ultimately you're going to pack it up and you'll do that work next week. But it's not necessarily about the work or anything like that. You've put your week into trying to get a good result. And especially on a weekend where, everything hasn't been going perfectly, things weren't going right anyway, but you knew that come Sunday, you could still perhaps drag a decent result out of it. And then something like that happens. It's incredibly frustrating. But at the same time, it's racing. These things happen. I think it wasn't something egregious. It wasn't something, Kimi didn't set out there to go and cause an accident. He made a mistake, and that's what it is. And like you said, Max was incredibly gracious and went and spoke to him, and I think that's typical of Max when he's dealing with people that understand that they've made a mistake, and they with Kimi, he's a rookie. Max has always been incredible in trying to help these rookies and he understands where he was when he joined the sport. We look at Max Verstappen now as this guy that can do absolutely everything, and he can. But, I remember after that first win in 2016, Max went through a lot of seasons where there were crashes and mistakes, and we all helped him grow and do better that. And Max understands that, and he wants to be that person to help these young drivers do the same. So I think, like you said, he handled it incredibly well. It's frustrating for everyone, but we just move forward. No losses, only lessons. There are certain things that are out of your control. We just go and get on with what we do best.
I like that, Craig. No losses, only lessons. We should remember that.
You take the setbacks of the sort of fees you pay for experience or whatever it is.
I used to say exactly the same thing about pit stops, right? I very rarely learn anything from our fastest pit stops, but every single bad one, I learned something.
Just in actual terms, where he's now 61 behind Max. Lando was 81 behind points off the championship lead at the end of Austria last year, and still managed to find a way to make the end of the season meaningful for him. There's still a couple of upgrades for Red Bull to come. As Calum says, Silverstone could be a good bit better, but it says, he kind of needs things going for him, not against them. And what happened in qualifying and then the race is is a bit of a body blow, really.
But it is, and it's like I said, those bad weekends that you don't want to have them, but we're not averse to a bad weekend. We've had plenty over the years. We've one of the things I think the team are actually really good at is bouncing back from those setbacks. How many times have we seen, certainly Max's side of the garage have a bad weekend and then come back the next weekend and have a great one. So like I said, we move forward. That's what we do. We learn from things like, even things like quali, getting caught out by the flag and things like that. They're just little things that you learn from and you understand. And I think at this point in the stage we're at, it's very much probably an each race at a time. We'll take each race. We'll see what we can do. We'll get absolutely everything we can out of it, as we always try to. And we'll just see what happens ahead of us.
I mean, some of the stats are amazing. We get this, Calum, I'm not sure we get this stats wrap at the end of a weekend. And some of these stats, when you consider what is 24 races in a season, Max's consistency has been incredible. His DNF ended a 31 race point streak and 74 of the last 75 races. So 24, 48, you're working out how many seasons that is. It's amazing.
That's brutal.
And it's the same with, it's relentless. It's the same with, when Yuki was having his problems, as the last classified finisher, Red Bull's 77 race scoring streak ended today or on Sunday, which was 4 short of the all-time record set by Ferrari. Oh. And that it must be so frustrating, and that you've got to start that again. But I guess, okay, you can start that again.
But that's exactly it, isn't it? Next week is the opportunity to start again.
But that must have been
it's the people that complain about F1 as a sport. It's, to my mind, it's this key reason. It's the individual excellence can not have the delivered result because of factors out with your own control as a sports
and also
person. It's a team. It's ultimately it is a constructor's game, as you were.
And sometimes like the hard years, the struggle years, they're part of the story. You look at where McLaren came from 3 years ago. That's part of a story, and all those people that are part of that, they've built that, and this is where they've gotten. Is when I joined Red Bull Racing in 2015, the RB11 was one of the worst cars we've ever produced. It was absolutely terrible. The team didn't get a bonus that year, and I felt like I'd brought my bad omen from Marussia to Red Bull Racing. But then over the next 10 years, I got to be a part of this amazing story of development, and we improved in every area, and that's a part of it. And I think real fans of the sport, you can appreciate that those stories are part of the history and the enjoyment of the sport.
Yeah, but that was because Mercedes had their rocket engine, wasn't it?
They did, but also,
it wasn't Red Bull's fault.
Well, but what was it? 2015, we finished 4th in the constructors. Willys beat us to 3rd in the constructors. I joined championship, winning team, and thought, I'm going to get a bonus this year, and absolutely nowhere, mate.
We have a question here from Loz, who's talking about the second car, which I think is an interesting one. What are Red Bull going to do to address the second car issues? Now, with Yuki, Liam finishing 6th was, clear that the guy who did a couple of races for Red Bull and then left is still a good racing driver. Yuki is a good racing driver. People might look, Craig and Calum, at the V-Carb, the Racing Bulls, and think, well, hang on, they've got a technology centre on the Milton Keynes campus. By regulation, it has to be separate. But is there anything that the second car could be adapted to be a bit more like the V-Carb to suit Yuki, who was good in the Racing Bulls?
I think realistically, your designs have to be your own. As you said, they're separated for a reason. I don't think there's that kind of thing like that you really pursue it. And also, Red Bull Racing have a design office who are very proud of producing their own designs and finding solutions to their problems. I don't think there's ever really an interest in trying to copy others and things like that. Yes, you might take inspiration and ideas, but ultimately you've got to do the work and you've got to make it work for your car and what you've got. And that's just how it is. I think in terms of supporting your other driver, it's just about supporting them. I think Yuki's doing everything. Do you know what? This is a really common question I get about the second car. Obviously, a lot of people ask me about this, and obviously, I've seen so many drivers in my time with the team, and they're all great. Like I think of, Pierre Gasly's a great Formula One driver. Alex Albon's a great Formula One driver. We look at these drivers now, and when we have a deep respect for how good they can be on their day. It's not like one of those things that I look at and say, oh yeah, you've not been able to drive this car. This is all doom and gloom. And like all of the drivers, you just want time to make it happen. And the pressure that you've always got is that you've got to make it happen. I always think that the pressure's changed massively over the years. I think that when Max first came into the team, like you said earlier, Ted, Mercedes were on this streak of they were going to win, right? So it inherently sort of changes the pressure that you're under. And, Yuki, Liam, they've joined the team after having this 2023 season that was, the best that any team and driver have ever, performed in Formula One. And the pressure is very different. And it's just about trying to support people, get them to the place they need to be to just get the decent results that they need. We're really quite good at adapting to different personalities, in terms of, if there's a team that's adaptable and able to sort of work in different ways. I guess when it comes to driver feedback, it's just about giving, feedback that correlates. You might point out different things, but ultimately when you put it all together, it correlates to an issue that you can identify and then go and try and rectify.
From the outside then, presumably there is a kind of a task force at Red Bull trying to make the car easier for the second driver to drive, whether they're taking ideas from Racing Bulls or anyone else. But they're not just saying, no, you've got to have it in the same window Max has and live with it, son. Sort of adapt to yourself.
I don't think it's necessarily like that. I think more than likely, your vehicle performance group, your engineering team, they say to you, look, this is what it looks like on paper, let's say. This is what the fastest car looks like. With your feedback, we can try and make some allowances here and here, and we can tell you that these will be the consequences, or we hope we can tell you, at least through our simulations, these will be the consequences of those changes. But we might find that making compromises in certain areas allows you to have the confidence to go faster in areas, and ultimately the delta and what you make up it's a gain rather than a loss anyway. And that's sort of the way you'll work as a team. But like you say, that that it does require sort of an understanding of exactly what you need, and obviously Max has always been brilliant at giving that information in terms of where the car is and what he likes and what he doesn't like, and he's always very specific about it, and that's always helped the team with their direction. But we've got some brilliant people and working a long time to try and work out these issues and using all of the tools that are at our disposal, and it's just about pulling it all together. And as we say, we look at Austria, and it was a weekend where we couldn't pull it all together. We've had other weekends this year where we really have managed to. And over the course of the year, it's just about trying to have more of the latter than the former.
Yeah. I mean, I asked Yuki about it on Thursday, actually, and from the driver himself, he said, "Look, it's just a confidence thing. I never really know whether it's going to be fantastic, and I can lean on the car, and it's going to do exactly what I want, and it's predictable, or whether it's not." But let's not forget, in Q1, Yuki was only a couple of tenths off Max. Yeah. Which was pretty good. But it was such a tight field that he was out by a few hundred. Right, let's have a look, because the constructors' points from the last three races tells its own tale of the team we're going to talk about next. So McLaren had 98 points from the last three races, Ferrari 68, Mercedes 62. They scored, of course, with one car in Austria because Kimi was out. Sauber are next with 20 because they are scoring with both cars, and just 1 point behind them a Red Bull with 19. So, of course, the Red Bull 19 and Sauber 20 tells the stories because Yuki is yet to score consistently with Red Bull. And then, of course, Max had the penalty in Canada, and then he was taken out. So that's why Red Bull are down there in 19. But let's get on to Sauber, shall we? And great weekend for them. Gabriel Bortoleto delivering on the promise that many think he is going to show as a champion of the future. First points for him. And Nico Hülkenberg from last on the grid after a shocker in qualifying to P9. That was amazing stuff.
Yeah, the Helmut Marko at the T-Nots to Gabriel Bortoleto's Team Talk forum at the start of the year by referring to him. But did he call him a grade 3 driver or something?
No, grade B. There was A, B, and C.
Yeah. Well, that's obviously been a little bit of motivation for Gabriel. And a year ago we were talking about it being a mess, and they couldn't even make a pit stop. They had to redesign the guns and everything else, didn't they? So yeah, big turnaround for them. And it's interesting because I spent a bit of time with Cadillac last week and looked around their new premises. The two different approaches to coming into F1, if you like. Audi coming in by buying an existing team, but trying to upgrade it in a big way. Cadillac trying to do it from scratch. That's going to be an interesting little contest next season to see which is the better way. Presumably, to have something in place and two and a half decades of experience in Sauber's case is a better base to begin from.
What do you think, Calum? Do you think that not only Jonathan Wheatley, but is it Lee Stevenson? Was he there at your time at Red Bull Racing? So he's been there for a few years now, to cut to I think almost 2 years. How much of that, because obviously it's a Swiss team, but they're very experienced, the Sauber mechanics, and everybody trackside. They've got good people, but maybe they just weren't, maybe they were sort of stuck in a rut in some way recently.
Yeah, I mean, look, when I speak to those people, when I speak to Jonathan and Lee, they sort of say that everything's coming together super well, and it's all sort of seemed to go really, really nicely. And that's showing, like you say, in Austria, it's sort of showing those things all come together, and you can see it in a team. You can see when just things are working well, like it's not just that on track result, but the pit stops and all of those things. And it will, I think, both Leroy and obviously Jonathan with his, over 30 years of experience in the pit lane, Jonathan, he's been in this sport for such a long time, and that would have been a huge boost for them. And so it's nice. It's nice to be able to see, people that I got to spend time with and work with, to see their sort of work come to fruition and them start to see results from it. And yeah, like you said, they're on a really, really, really good trajectory. So yeah, we'll just see how it goes. I think, I expect that the input that both of those people have had from their time at Red Bull Racing will be valuable. I think, like you said, when you say stuck in a rut, it does take a while to get used to performing well. You sort of, you build to it, you build up to it. And we did many years of building. We spent all those years just behind Mercedes, and we were building, and you're working behind the scenes. And those are the things that Jonathan and Lee will be doing with the team, is helping them behind the scenes get all of those other little things right. I watched Red Bull from 2015 up to, 2022. I watched us improve our logistics, our manufacturing processes, our design, our communication across the business. All of those things, are what it takes to perform at the front. And I think, like you said, Lee and Jonathan will be helping get all of those things together behind the scenes. And yeah, that will only get better.
All right, Craig, let's pick up on this news that Sauber are going to open what are they going to call it? A technical centre, a remote centre, a place where UK-based personnel can be a part of the Sauber team, but stay with their families in the UK. Now, I think it's crucial, because it leaves Ferrari as the only team now based in Italy who at the moment do not have a UK base, because Racing Bull's main factory in Faenza, they have a UK base that Lauren McKees has been saying, with the improvement in remote working, is working really well for them. And they're meaning that a lot of people in the sort of, motorsport valley, the expertise that all the UK-based engineers, mechanics and technicians have, that they can come and work for a European-based team, but keep their kids in school in the UK, keep their families in the UK if they want to. Do you think Ferrari are going to follow suit?
Well, I mean, I don't know about Ferrari. I feel like they're very, very happy in Maranello. But
that would almost be a national question, wouldn't it?
I feel it would. I feel like that'd have to go to Italian Parliament or whatever it is, and voted upon for that to happen. So I think that's probably a long way from being a reality. But I think there's two things for me. I think it's great, obviously, that teams want to come to the UK and build bases. Always happy to see that any sort of expansion in the motorsport sector. I think the one thing that I will say is, like you say, we have this motorsport valley. And one of the things that I've sort of discovered in this new ambassadorial role is it can be a real barrier to entry into motorsport. If you want to go and be an engineer or a mechanic, you have to, we're getting to a point where pretty much you have to come and live in the UK, which you might think
counties. I know what you mean.
Yeah, I was a Londoner, and I was really fortunate in that my parents were essentially able to support me while I commuted and didn't work to go and study to try and build a career in Formula One. But for people that don't have that and sort of live in our big cities, it's a real barrier to access to the sport. So it's a bit of a shame in that sense. One thing that I also would touch on is, and in my book, I was quite vocal about my sort of general disdain for the fact that salaries are part of the cost cap. Cadillac they've been able to sort of get a lot of people of their staff from other teams. And I think it's a significant advantage you have when you're building a team from scratch over the big established teams already, because the big established teams, when the cost cap came into force, they're in a position where no big team wants to go and make redundancies, but you're already a large organization, and these caps are now, these salaries are now part of your cap. Whereas when you're starting a team from scratch, you can try and pick key personnel, offer them more money than they were on or wherever, and significantly, and essentially you try and keep your logistical operations small, and get the most out of it. But what you can do is attract some of the best talent. And I think we've seen that. I think we've seen that with Aston Martin. We've seen when they were building. We've seen that. We're going to see that with Cadillac, and I'm sure. And we've also seen it with Sauber and Audi coming into the sport. They were a much smaller organisation, so they had room in their cap to try and sort of attract some key personnel. Obviously, I was quite vocal about it. I absolutely think that salaries for the lowest earners in the sport should not be part of the financial regulations. I think we've created a very, very strange system whereby we're all okay to say, yeah, if you're one of the top 3 earners, then that's fine, earn as much as you like. But if you're one of the lowest earners of the sport, unfortunately, the team are going to constantly have to choose between the car performing and you getting paid what you're worth. Yeah. And, unfortunately, I just don't think that should be a part of the rules. I think, if you feel like you're worth more, you should be able to go to your employer and say, look, I think that I'm worth more. And your employer then has a choice to make. They can say, we agree with you and we're going to pay you more, or we don't agree with you and we're not going to pay you more. I don't think that these multi-million pound race teams should now be able to say, oh, we'd love to pay you more, but we just can't because of the cap. I don't think that the rules should facilitate that.
Yeah, because it's going to force out the best people, isn't it?
It does. It's going to lead to a brain drain.
It's exploiting people's desire to be in F1, but running down.
Ultimately, it becomes a race to the bottom, because when somebody leaves a role, that team is then going to try to pay the next person less, and this is what we go down, and it's only leading one way.
Yeah. Okay. Come on, FIA. Adjust the rules.
Let's sort it out.
Right. We're going to take a break. Still to come on the F1 show, we will ask whether Ferrari have taken a genuine step forward, and we'll talk testing in 2026.
Quick word on our show partner, Audi. The philosophy of Audi Sport isn't just about winning races. It's about pushing boundaries. Everything learnt on the track goes straight into Audi's road cars, making them just as thrilling as they are refined. Take the Audi RS range, serious performance, but with a level of sophistication and refinement that doesn't need to be loud to make a statement. It's that perfect blend of power and precision wrapped in quiet luxury. Whether it's their powerful style or the RS Sport suspension with Quattro all-wheel drive for razor-sharp handling, Audi is constantly redefining the future of performance. Book a test drive today to experience the Audi RS range for yourself.
Hello again, welcome back to the F1 show, where we're joined by Calum Nicholas, former Red Bull racing technician and Red Bull ambassador and author. We'll get onto that in a bit. And our very own Craig Slater, who was with me in Austria. Right, gentlemen, we're going back to Austria at the moment. And it was a third and fourth, another podium for Ferrari, for Charles Leclerc. That's 3, I think, in recent races, after a second in Monaco, and a 4th for Lewis Hamilton. And Lewis, after the race, Craig, I think he was speaking to you, was saying how great everything was. That didn't entirely square with the why are you pitting me? I really don't want to pit now. Can we please not pit now? Can you marry the two up for me? Because I didn't really get how he sounded so frustrated with the strategy that just guaranteed he was going to finish where he was behind Leclerc, which is maybe what Ferrari were after, just to keep the order. And yet after the race, he sounded so positive about their weekend.
Yeah. I'm not sure he was thinking about the one stop and fending Leclerc off that way. But I think he was a safety car, is what he said to me, was why the chance of a safety car and a cheap pit stop was the reason he thought he could extend a bit longer. But his best day, I think, was Saturday. I think that was his most confident qualifying performance for Ferrari, and an improved qualifying all round for the team. Not only was he not far behind Charles, but he came away knowing exactly how he could have made that time up, and got himself on the front row himself rather than his teammates. So positive from that aspect, but still a lot of shortcomings in Ferrari terms, if you look at it in terms of how far behind McLaren they were. That whole business of lifting and coasting, which we talked about, you and I, after the race on the bus on the way to the airport, Ted, and the body language from Leclerc when he was considering it. How on earth are we going to win anything when our car behaves so erratically at high speed, that we're having to lift and coast to avoid porpoising or whatever it is. So clearly there's still a feeling we've come into this season with a car with a lot of flaws, which could possibly even compromise the entire year. Let's see, there's a couple of updates still to come. The floor has done something, but is the floor only slightly optimizing running the car at the wrong ride height, effectively? They need this suspension redesign to properly join the fight with McLaren and Red Bull, don't they?
Yeah, he was Calum. Jerome D'Ambrosio was stand-in team principal on the weekend. Did you was he there when you were at Marussia?
No, so I think it was the year he'd finished the year that I joined, basically.
Okay.
So when I started in the factory, he'd just been done with it.
He's done well as a former not to sound condescending to him, but as a former driver, and now he's stand-in team principal at Ferrari.
That's the way to go, yeah, for sure.
Great, isn't it? And what do you make of Lewis? I was struck particularly in Canada, I think it was, Calum. I think you might have heard Lewis say this, was that the way Ferrari set their car up for a certain circuit was completely different from any of the other cars that he'd driven. I didn't really understand how that's possible. Is it possible to do things sort of completely different, but still get to within a tenth of a second of the pace setters?
Well, I mean, I don't know if Lewis was specifically talking about the geometry used, or in terms of the processes they go to get to that result. Like the processes that we have through our engineering groups. I wonder if Lewis was referring to that in terms of the way they set their car up, the way they go about trying to find this balance is completely different to anything he's used to. Okay. Like the way a lot of teams sort of go about it is that they'll say to you, right, we're going to start at what we know is an extreme balance. We know it's extreme in this direction. We're going to then dial it back and see where we get to and see what side effects come from dialing it back. That's one, that might be one way you work. And I don't know if Lewis was referring to that, but in reference to him being quite positive, after Austria, I think it's interesting because I think it's very different for Charles and Lewis, because I think we, as much as we would have all loved, and myself included, really, would have loved Lewis to arrive at Ferrari and get fabled wins and go on. And I don't think Lewis expected that. The last time Lewis made this big jump, it was in preparation. I remember when he first joined Mercedes, and there were plenty of issues, and he had issues with the car and the way it drove and things like that. But he built, and then it was all in preparation for what was to come. So I still am hopeful that Lewis feels like he's on track. I feel like perhaps he was always about looking at next year with Ferrari and building something long term, but that's a bit different for Charles. Obviously, he's been there a while. He's probably expecting something different, expecting something better. So when I think about Lewis being positive after Austria, ultimately the race worked out for him. It wasn't a bad result, and for him, okay, fine, he didn't beat his teammate, but ultimately that's neither here nor there, because whether you're either winning or you're third or fourth, I'm sorry, but that's the race driver's view of it, right? Yeah, you'll always scrape a point for the team and this, that, and the other, but you're always going to look to win or not win, and if you're not winning, then you just want to make sure you're building and you're making progress. So perhaps that's what sort of left Lewis feeling positive, is that he feels like they left that race with some progress.
In a way, it's ideal for Lewis this year, isn't it? In that he's able to do his learning and not losing out on a championship, in a sense.
This is it.
in an ideal world, he would, like you said, he would have jumped in and he'd have been a title contender. But if he is having to have a year of acclimatization, better to do it when his teammate isn't running away with the wins.
Yeah, exactly. And, last time he made a big decision about where he went to a new team, everyone was like, are you mad? And look how stupid we all looked when Mercedes went and won for the next 7-8 years.
Yeah. Well, I think it will be, in many ways, he might even get to the point, Lewis, where he has helped make Ferrari into a championship-winning team again, but after maybe 3 years there, finds himself at 41, 42, 43 years old and thinking, you know what, I've got them to this point, but I'm not going to be driving anymore. So maybe his greatest legacy might be getting Ferrari to where they need to be, even if he might not be there to take the fruits of the labour. But we will have to see. He shows no sign of wanting to stop so far. Now, someone who did stop, and an ex-teammate of Lewis Hamilton's who has stopped, but perhaps only momentarily, for a moment, is Valtteri Bottas. And I must say, I missed this, and I spoke to Valtteri on the weekend, and it's not like he would have said, oh, by the way, you might find me in an Alpine next week, but he didn't mention anything about it. So, Craig, pick up this Flavio Briatore's interest in Valtteri Bottas for us.
Yes, well, all I can do is confirm that, yes, indeed, Alpine have made an inquiry to Mercedes about Bottas's availability this season. Not that surprising anyway. I mean, Franco Colapinto, from having five races to prove himself, is now on a race-to-race arrangement, it seems. He's doing his best. He's doing okay. Is he doing that much better than Jack Doohan? Is there the sense that this is a potentially point-scoring car and an experienced hand would chip in some points on a more regular basis? Exactly what are Alpine trying to do with this team in the medium term? Plenty of people have said that it's being geared up for sale. Alpine deny that's the case. The Renault parent company say there are no plans to sell. But yeah, you can't help thinking that maybe they do need a bit of experience there. Colapinto will be given his chance, I suppose, to try and grind out some results. He's looked good in parts, hasn't he? But not really a solid banker to convert performance into points week in, week out.
Yeah, they're a good team, aren't they, Calum? The Enstone team, but they've scored 4 points with Pierre Gasly in the last 3 races. That's more than Haas with 3 and Williams with 1. But they're a works team, and they just need more points, I guess.
I got to be honest. I think right now, if I'm there in Enstone, I'm not really looking at the second driver as my sort of starting point to fix my woes. I think I'm happy with Pierre and saying, look, we've got a driver with plenty of experience to help us develop a car. And the thing that's always struck me about sort of things that go on in Alpine is that management structure is just chaotic. There never seems to be any sort of real stability for any real period of time. And I think that's where I'd be putting my focus in, trying to just get the team into a stable working environment where we can make progress on a car, look to next year. And I think like second driver discussions for me, it just sounds like window dressing.
Yeah, it is a bit, Craig. And I wonder whether the real issue is trying to get a replacement for Luca De Meo as the Renault Group boss, because as they say, they might not have any. They might say we have no plans to leave Formula One at the moment, but at the moment I have no plans to make myself a cup of tea later. But I probably will make myself a cup of tea later. So no plans doesn't mean anything.
The difference is it's not a loss-making enterprise anymore, being an F1 team. So it's not so much a negative on the balance sheet for Renault. It's a positive, and they might not get. I mean, it might not be this amazing platform to sell Alpine cars, but it's probably not doing them that much harm. And maybe waiting another couple of years, and that team might be worth even more money. A lot of talk about Steve Nielsen going there as the day-to-day boss, isn't there? And I think he's taking a bit of persuading from what we hear to take that job on. But maybe he will dovetail with Flavio Briatore. You're right. Maybe they're thinking bringing Bottas in. You're right. It's another change, and do they need yet more change? But he's a kind of calming influence, I suppose, around the place, isn't he?
He's also great as a marketing asset. Is the reality about
he is now, yeah.
He's beloved, so I can understand the desire to have somebody like him on board, absolutely. But I don't think it's the sort of the silver bullet to turning the car around and fixing all the issues.
Yeah, indeed. Okay, well, maybe his expertise or experience with Mercedes might help, given that Alpine are going to be Mercedes-powered next year. You never know. But then some of the Colapinto sponsors, Mercado Libre, they're on the shirts. They're on the Alpine shirts just here, so they might not be too happy if Colapinto moves on. But we'll have to see what's going on with that. One of Bottas's many previous teams is Williams. So let's conclude before we talk a bit about Silverstone with a look at Williams. They are at the bottom of the last 3 race scorers. So they've only scored 1 point over the last 3 races. And Paul Alaka asks, whilst Williams have improved a lot, operationally, they might be lacking. They're unable to have a cleanly executed weekend. Yes, you're unlucky, but maybe you'll make your own luck in this sport. Should we discuss this in terms of Alex Albon and Carlos Sainz? First of all, Alex Albon knows that there will be these issues that come along, but he's had a great opening part of the season, but it's dried up, and maybe do we think Alex Albon is more reticent about the whole thing? But conversely, do we think Carlos is thinking, well, hang on, this isn't the Williams I thought I was joining? Calum, what do you think? You can understand it if Carlos was sold, you're coming to the great Williams, but he would know this is a team like many others, a bit in transition.
Yeah, and that's it. And look, I think Carlos had that choice to make, didn't he? He had that choice to join a team and be a part of building something, which is obviously something that Alex has been a part of for a long time. Again, it's one of those things. I don't think it's fair to say that operationally they're behind. I think James Vowles has done incredible work to get to bring that team sort of even, close and in the same ballpark to their resources that, to some of the teams that they were competing against. But like you said, it's a transitional period. I think Carlos Sainz would have joined it knowing that. And to expect you're not going to have bad weekends is absurd. I don't think he would have expected that at all. I think that I think the thing that you'll be most disappointed at, especially with Alex Albon, is if his issue was the same issue that he's had before, that's when frustration starts to creep in a little bit. I remember during our years of the Renault engine, my biggest frustration was that we were, suffering the same issues week in, week out, and that's where it becomes problematic. With Carlos's one, I don't know if Williams sort of given any info in terms of what happened with Carlos's car.
I asked him if the brakes had just locked all the way back to the pits after the initial, some sort of brake jam or something, or blockage, and then
because he was stuck on the grid.
Yeah. He said not the whole way around, but for most of the way around. So is that car assembly?
I mean, it could obviously, if it's rear brakes, you've got the whole brake-by-wire system, so that sort of opens up a whole new sort of area of potential issues. The only time that I've sort of heard of race calipers becoming locked is if the QD is not properly secured. They can at some point, let's say you're on the brake pressure and that QD locks off, the caliper will then hold that pressure. It will hold the pressure that's still in the caliper because they are a dry lock, quick disconnect Staubli. So if they're not properly engaged and they're enough to let fluid through, but then it comes unlatched when you're on the brake pressure, then that pressure will stay latched on. And if you're driving around the rest of the circuit with your brakes on, essentially, that can quite quickly cause a fire. So I wonder if that was the issue, if it was a bit of hardware or assembly. But like I said, with that rear brake system and the brake-by-wire that's all connected to it and the powered master cylinder and things like that, it does become a little bit more complex in terms of trying to find the issue.
Yeah, it's funny because I watched, the team radio, Sainz's engineer said, just before the race, said, remember, it's going to be very warm. And with the race, there's going to be mistakes. And we have to be the ones not making the mistake. And then pronto that happened.
That's the last.
I asked it, probably a bit of a naive question. I asked both of them, in any way, is this connected to your now public decision to focus on 2026 versus 2025, and in any way do you take your eye off the ball so very slightly? I mean, and actually Carlos rightly said no. Actually, mistakes should creep in even less if we're working with a car which is not being upgraded from race to race. So it's we need to work out why at the end of the season, it seems to be, I don't know, they had a similar, it was sort of not connected to this year, but it sort of felt like their season, as it tailed off last year, maybe will tail off again this year.
Yeah, I mean, if obviously it's a hardware issue, then unless it's newly designed hardware, then I can't imagine that would be part of the thing. It's an interesting question. People always ask about this time in the year, don't we? We talk about as teams start to divert resources onto your next car, and I think it's interesting because the way that I've always seen it, both when I was at Marussia, where we had a really small design office, and obviously at Rebel Racing, where we have an absolutely massive design office, and it sort of scared me to go in there. I used to never like walking in the design office. It was like going into a library where everyone looks up from their desks and stares at you as you come in. I used to hate going in the DO. But the way you sort of always tend to divide it in a team is that you for most years, what you have is a section of your design office that will consider themselves future car. So at the beginning of each year, future car have handed over to this year's sort of design team that are going to continue the development of that car. And then slowly, as the year goes on, you might divert a few more engineers and designers to future car work and things like that. But it tends to be like a fairly fixed schedule, like in terms of the way you do this, because those people have projects that they're working on. You can't just wake up one morning and go, right, all of you lot are going to go and do that. It's not really a sensible way to work. So it tends to be scheduled anyway, that you'd be like, right, on this date, you're going to move over to this project and vice versa. And now teams have to be so much more stringent on that stuff anyway, just because of the way you account for that time in the cost cap. So they're not really changes that you make that quickly that are going to happen. I'd find it very odd if it was related to that in any way.
Yeah, I think so. If I was in that design office, I would have said, come in and thank you for making our crazy designs actually happen. We send you all this stuff. We know it's not perfect sometimes, but thank you so much for making it reliable and making it happen, Calum.
I always used to quite enjoy it when we used to get we run a project at Rebel Racing, so where designers get to come out and to the circuit and see some of the bits that they've worked. Obviously during
really
testing, you have lots of those people, but even during race weekends as well, people from the DO and other areas of the company. It's nice when you get a designer who's done a very specific bit and they'd come into the engine area at the beginning of the year and be like, I did that. And I'd be like, well, at the moment it's okay, but if it doesn't work, I'm going to let you know. Now I know who to call. I know who to get onto Teams to and tell them to get down here.
Yeah. Or someone come in and say, yeah, I did that. You say, yeah, how do you expect me to get my hand that is this shaped?
Honestly, that is pretty much what goes on throughout all of January.
To do that.
I felt really bad. I felt really bad, actually, because we had a placement student who designed a saddle just before we left, a saddle for a water pipe, and she was super proud of it, and she'd done a great job. This was like an absolutely lovely. It did everything you wanted it to. Everything fitted in it snugly. She'd done a great job of it, and she came down and she was looking at it and she was really proud. And then we went away to pre-season testing, and I got one of our sort of documents, a technical document of an upgrade for this saddle, and I was like, oh, she's going to be so upset that her saddle's having to be changed just because we're changing something else on the car. It becomes very personal, you know.
Yeah, no, I can imagine. Sorry for an idiot like me, Calum. The QD on the brakes is the quick.
Yeah, the quick disconnect. So
obviously,
I mean, you still do have to bleed a brake system after it has been disconnected, but you can get away with it. They won't really let a lot of air in. That you can sort of, but they're like a latch system. So it's sort of like a collar that turns and then pulls back in order to disconnect it. But when you connect them, if they're not fully latched, what they can do is at some point it will come unlatched. And if that's while the brake pressure is on, that brake pressure will stay in there in that caliper.
Okay, I see. Good stuff. Right, let's deal with some other drivers and other teams just before we look forward to Silverstone, shall we? Calum and Craig. Got to say congratulations to the old campaigner Fernando Alonso. It was a slow start scoring points for Aston Martin this year, but he is really getting them in now. And ahead of him, a really standout performance from Liam Lawson. I know we've said it already, but proving that he has the quality that we always thought he had, and rounding out that sixth place for Racing Bulls, some really important ones. So we've spoken about Hulkenberg. Ocon, well done, honourable mention for him getting a point for Haas. But yeah, what did either of you think of the old campaigner? I like the not only great shot stuff from Liam Lawson, but Fernando Alonso saying, look, well done, my client Gabriel Bortoleto, but I'm still going to finish ahead of you. And I'm still going to do it on a one stop that you're on fresher tyres. I like that.
I think it's interesting. it's been a good start to the year, really, for Fernando now. Like, obviously, it started off a bit. But I think it's interesting. I actually had the impression this year that I was expecting very little from Aston Martin. And it was only last year, before I sort of departed the racetrack, speaking to some of my friends that work within the team. And they were saying, look, I think for the most part, the team are going to spend most of their resources looking towards 2026. I really think they brought very little to that car, and they really weren't expecting sort of anything from this season. So it's good to see Fernando's still got it, and he'll always drag something out of it.
Yeah, they looked... Even Lance Stroll looked quite quick throughout practice as well, didn't he? So they although the noises coming out the team were that we didn't expect to go well at all in Austria, but one-stop strategy, which you wonder someone like Fernando how much he appreciates. I suppose he takes on any challenge and tries to relish it, but it was that was a pretty attritional Sunday he had. So much talk about who might end up at Aston Martin. George Russell being potentially quoted. Obviously, Max going there has been a lot of talk around that as well. But they are one team that could completely transform in 26, couldn't they? If the Honda power unit, if Andy Cowell, who is making all these trips to Japan, is having some input in there and could steer it in the right direction, then they could take an enormous step, couldn't they, for 26?
I guess we'll all be hoping so. Like you said, the amount of resources have been poured into the new factory and all of those things. I think it's a fairly good decision for them to focus on that. I think if you came into this season in the position they were in, and you look at, right, I've got McLaren are going to be out front. Mercedes, Ferrari, they are going to pick up their pace. Red Bull are obviously going to do Red Bull, and they're going to pick up their pace at some point. There's not really a great deal to fight for this year. So diverting those resources for me in that position is not a bad move to make. I guess it's just always the big thing of how you never know how it's going to turn out. I feel like whenever people ask me about 2026, there's just so many unknowns right now. I feel like we're so far away from having any idea of what we're going to look like.
All right, Silverstone. Craig, put your Silverstone hat back on, and let's talk about that. It's kind of pointless at this point to say who do we think is going to do well. There you go, on the side. We need to see the other logo. There we go. It's pointless to see whether we think Lando's comeback will he's turned the corner, whether that will continue at Silverstone. Either it will or it won't, or either Oscar Piastri will get back in there.
Well, he's never won back-to-back races in the same season, and that's a significant statistic, I think, for him, because the guys that come in and win bunches together, Valtteri Bottas never kind of won. When he was up driving alongside Lewis, never won like 3 on the spin, did he? It seems to be the ones that win championships, I'm stating the obvious, are the ones that can put a consistent run together. We've seen more of that from Oscar Piastri. We have seen that. He's a known quantity in that regard. So Lando, yes, he needs to show he can put a spell together where he gets on top and exploits that. Got a lot of attention on him. Big media day on Wednesday. He's got. I know some of the national terrestrial broadcasters have got interviews with him. So for McLaren are giving him a fair bit of work to do. He's got the stand for the second successive year, populated only by Lando Norris fans, that sold out in 90 minutes. So it's a lot of expectation to carry. I think he does. I'm coming round to the idea that he people have suggested, are there some mental frailties there? Is he a bit too much down on himself? I'm coming round to the idea that he knows himself, and he's comfortable talking about his occasional lapses in self-confidence, and that's just his way of dealing with it, and it seems to be working.
Yeah, I think, like his self-awareness is not a bad thing, right? I think if anything, it's got to be something that you look at and say, well, at least you're self-aware about the things that you need to be better at and the things you do. I think as for this weekend, like you say, a lot of pressure with the stand and all of that thing. I guess for him, it will just be a case of trying to embrace it and allowing it to empower him rather than letting it sort of sit on him and weigh him down. I know, I remember talking to Daniel Ricciardo about it in Australia. And, like as much as he loved being at home and among the home crowd, he said, that sort of commitment to Australian fans while he was there could be such a huge burden at times. And it can be, it can be a really hard thing to sort of focus on what you're doing and what you're trying to achieve on track when you've got, all of Australia there rooting for you. It can be really, really tough.
People won't always see this. We go to a lot of races, Ted. I was telling you, in Canada, I drove by the McLaren hotel every day to the track. There were 100 teenage fans outside the front of that hotel every day there to see him. And that happens I've seen it in Hungary. I've seen it in different places. He is actually, he really has a spotlight on him, maybe more so than any other recent F1 driver in terms of a very, very committed young fan base. So it's an unusual life he's leading in his early to mid-20s in that regard.
Yeah, look, I think it's important. As a sport, we want to reach new fan bases, especially the younger generation. It's what we've been very, very successful in doing over the last, 8 years. So, and characters like Lando are great for that, and I guess some people are not going to like it. Some people don't really appreciate it.
Must be hard though, stopping, smiling every fight.
It's not. I can't imagine it's easy. Honestly, I see some of these drivers when they've been out and about, and it's something that a lot of people say to me. Goes, these drivers, some of them they don't want to take autographs with fans, and I say to them, it's not that they don't, mate. It's that they do it all day, every day, and these are people that need time for themselves and space and things like that. So yeah, we have to cut them a little bit of slack as well, especially on a Grand Prix weekend when they've got all of this going on around them.
Yeah, I think if they don't, if they can't, then that will be in the minority of people. They've managed to stop and take a selfie or do an autograph for most people. It's just some of them they can't do. They can't get around to all of them. Okay, that is Silverstone. We will see how that goes. Final question, since we got you here, Calum. Despite appearances, Craig is not a Red Bull mechanic, but we're interested in, and maybe you addressed this in your book, Life in the Pit Lane, which is available now from all good booksellers. It's on my TBR, my to be read book,
nice.
which I need to get round to it right after I get round to all the other ones, the Mercedes book and finishing my own book as well. But tell us in there, because Craig and I were looking at the 2026 testing schedule that was just been announced, and there are a couple of tests in Bahrain which will be televised, but there's one in Barcelona at the end of January and the beginning of February. It's a 5-day test. You can appear on, Craig, are they limited to 3 days, or you can run 3, or you can run all of the days?
I don't think they are running. Every team is running every day, or needs to.
The point is that it is a closed test. So for the first time in a while, it's a closed test, no photographers, no media. So I assume that means that the team's own social media people won't be there, or maybe they will, I don't know. But from a technician, from a mechanic's point of view, Calum, is that a good thing? Can you understand that for the first time we'll just have to tell the fans, look, can you let us get our behind the scenes stuff sorted first, and then we'll be open house? What do you think?
Well, I mean, it sounds incredibly peaceful for a mechanic or technician. What I think it's probably going to feel like is back when we went racing at the beginning, when we first went racing after COVID, where the paddock was incredibly quiet. You had the bare minimum amount of people working in those environments, and I get it from the outsider fan perspective, it's not ideal. But if you're just a mechanic, it is going to make it a lot more peaceful. And I think when you go through this huge regulation change, and it is massive. It is the engines. These are going to be new cars. There's going to be very little, if anything, that carries over from one of these cars to the following year. Something that I've experienced throughout the last 10 years is that even when a car can look completely different under its bodywork, there's so many components that will carry over. And obviously, that takes out a large element of risk of failure when you can do that. These are all new. Completely new, and the teams are going to need a little bit of time to just sort of get their heads around them, not just in terms of them performing and being reliable, but their own operational procedures. Things are going to change. When you've got media in pit lanes, in paddocks, it can make all of that stuff really difficult. So I'm not surprised that the teams have been given this opportunity to just have a private run out, get all of your things in order, And then, we've still got the next tests for the public to attend and the media. So yeah, I mean, I kind of understand why they've done it. I get that fans might think it's a little bit frustrating, but I think it's important for teams to be able to sort of get things to where they need to be before the product is out on show.
It's the first time the cars are running, and we're not going to see it. I mean, come on.
All right. Well,
I mean, the thing is, I mean, okay, I hear what you're saying, but for most of those teams, they still have their allocation of film days. I guarantee some of those teams will do a film day prior to that test, which is their actual shakedown, which again, the media can't attend. So it's not like there's not precedent for it. But yeah, I can understand your frustration for sure.
Well, they better get on with it because it's January 26th. And, in recent years, certainly in the last decade, I haven't known testing to start in around January the 26th. So that is very, very early. But listen, that is all we've got time for on the F1 show. But Calum, Nicholas, thank you so much for your expertise. Despite Craig's shirt, it's great to have somebody who actually knows what they're talking about on the podcast. So thank you so much. Of course, Calum's book, Life in the Pit Lane, is available on anywhere you buy your books. Craig Slater, thank you so much.
Can I change my biggest shocker of the week to wearing this shirt on the?
Well, it's very good, but if I see you with a Swish new watch on your on your wrist, then I'll know that something's up. But yeah, thank you very much for listening. See you throughout the Silverstone weekend, which is coming up, of course, this weekend. It's the 3rd, the 4th, and the 5th. The 3rd, the 4th, the 5th, and the 6th of July, because we have the F1 show on Thursday. Depending on when you're listening to this, might be just around the corner. Anyway, thanks, Calum. Thanks, Craig. Thank you for watching, and see you at Silverstone. Bye-bye.